Welcome to Data Security Decoded from Rubrik Zero Labs. I'm your guest host, Caleb Tolan, and we're in the final part of our special series recapping highlights from Rubrik Zero Labs Virtual Summit. In this episode, we're diving deep into data security strategy. Steve Stone sits down with Rubrik CEO Bipul Sinha to hear from a chief executive about why understanding and managing cyber risk is business critical. From discussing why risk resonates more with C-suites and boards to exploring the challenges facing industries like healthcare, this conversation offers invaluable insights to business leaders and cybersecurity professionals alike. Bipul and Steve dive into the importance of cyber resilience and why conversations we're not having about cybersecurity might be the most important ones of all. Let's get into it.
Well, Bipul, I want to start at the beginning. I know that's kind of a crazy place to start, but as we were starting to look at what was our next research topic going to be, and we were engaging with you on what we thought some of the most impactful areas could be, you were adamant. You were adamant from the jump. We had to focus on risk and how organizations and business leaders think about risk and how that ties into cybersecurity. So before we get into some of our findings, why was that so important to you? Why was risk the right topic?
If you look at where we are in the industry and in the technological cycle, every business is becoming tech business. And it is on IT leaders, which used to be owners and operators of technology. They are now the builders of portfolio of services. The services can come from on-premises infrastructure, cloud infrastructure, SaaS apps, but they are creating a portfolio of services, and their job number one is to reduce the risk in the portfolio. And what is the biggest risk today across technology is cyber. So cyber risk is so critical, and every business, since the technology is the most critical piece, they need to understand what is the risk in their technology portfolio. Can they keep their services up and running? Can they deliver digital trust to their end customers so that their business can thrive? That's why understanding, measuring, and mitigating risk is so critical.
So one of the things that I think has surprised a number of folks as we've taken this research out on the street and really engaged with a number of organizations is once we started talking about risk compared to some of the more traditional cybersecurity topics, the things that threat research teams tend to talk about more, what we found is C-suites and boards are much more apt to pick up this risk content. They're more comfortable with it. And frankly, we're seeing them turn it into actionable methods in ways that we haven't seen with some more traditional cybersecurity topics. What makes risk convert for CEOs and your peer group?
If you think about it, risk is something that the business leaders, particularly CEO and board, deal with all the time, because they look at the whole business and the risk in the business, and their goal is to devise strategies and implement those strategies to mitigate that risk. Traditionally, cybersecurity discussions used to be technology discussion. Do you have the right EDR platform? Do you have the right firewall? Do you have the right cloud gateway? But boards and CEOs can't operate their business understanding the pieces of technology. They need to understand, do we have acceptable risk in the business? Are we taking more than acceptable risk? Do we have the right technology pieces that creates that acceptable risk posture? And business leaders are more comfortable understanding risk to business, risk to value, risk to their strategy, as opposed to technology pieces, because they can't devise their business strategy based on technology. They can devise business strategy based on the risk. So they are more familiar with risk. They are used to understanding risk and mitigating risk, devising a strategy to implement things that helps them propagate and ensure that the business is continuing operation. And so this is why we focus so much on risk, and we are finding great success in the marketplace.
So while we've had a great deal of success speaking about risk in this context, there's been some not great news to go with the great news. One of the things that, as you know, we talked about in the study was we examined risk before a crisis event, how that risk changes in a crisis, and then how that risk reset happens. There's a ransomware event, which we focused on primarily in this study, and then coming out of that, the recovery and the reset and the new steady state risk. And what we do see is that third part, that reset, is where the most impact can be delivered. The flip side, the not so great news is we tend to see this is where organizations struggle. whether it's messaging from the action officers and the subject matter experts to C-suites and boards, or if the C-suites and boards just have the next crisis to move on to, we see struggle there. And so I'm really interested in your perspective as a CEO that has to deal with not just crisis and risk, but untold constant crises and lots of risk. How can we do that better? How can those subject matter experts, those of us in the field, help capture that window in the reset moment without undercutting the other risk elements that CEOs and boards have to tackle?
As Mike Tyson once said, everybody has a plan till they get punched on the face. And once they get punched on the face, then they have to really think, are their plans are really operational, and are they going to recover and get back? And so if you think about cybersecurity, the traditional cybersecurity is all about like preventing attacks, which is all about plan. But actual breach and actual attack is a punch on the face of the organization. And how do you react to it? And how do you bounce back with more resilience, more agility, better set of infrastructure and process and talent and planning, so that when it happens to you next time, you are better prepared and you are better responding to it. But then here is the crazy part. Once the incident happens, it has a lot of human toll. And as we have seen, there is a human impact of cybersecurity is huge. People have mental health issues post an attack and other issues. So they want to get away from the attack, post-attack scenario to get back into the regular operations. But that's exactly the wrong thing to do. You have to dwell in the problem to be able to create a long-term solution. And dwelling in the problem means that understand what things worked out, what things didn't work out. In this risk reset, what are the new set of risks that we see? Are we better off post this cyber incidents than before? And if you're not better off post this cyber event, then there is something fundamentally what we are not doing to be able to get back to into a better state. So the risk resetting is in some ways is an opportunity, because it's not the question of if, it's the question of when. And when attacks are inevitable, the more you do in the risk resetting phase of the cyber response, the better you are prepared for the next time. And that's why our focus has always been to help our customers and organization create better cybersecurity posture. Better cybersecurity posture doesn't mean that you prevent 100% of the attack, because nobody can. But how do we prepare organization that when inevitable attack happen, you are able to keep your services up and running in spite of attacks and breaches? You are continue to deliver digital services. The hospitals are open, they can admit patients. The schools are open, kids can continue to go to school. Your swipe on your credit card, your ATM machine can give you money in spite of bank being attacked. And that's the true hallmark of whether we are creating a cyber resilient organizations.
So I know you spend literally all of your day talking risk and resiliency. I'm curious, in your experience, what's the conversation that isn't happening? You mentioned how big of a topic this is. And I know we were talking about this at RSA. I mean, you walk the RSA floor, resiliency, it's the new buzzword. It's what AI was last year. But I know that you talk quite frequently about the conversations that are not happening. I would love to hear your take on what are those, and how do we drive the right conversations that we're not having to be our tomorrow conversation?
See, the thing is that when folks think about cyber resiliency, everybody thinks about resiliency differently. And some people like to avoid bad news. They don't want to put themselves in a situation when the attack has happened and now what? So they always try to focus on how do we prevent attacks. So a lot of cyber discussion is still focused on what are the tools and technologies and services that you have to prevent attack, because nobody wants to think about when it happens to you, now what? But that's where the focus has to be. The focus has to be that are you prepared for an attack? And are you really going to bounce back after an attack and continue to deliver your digital products and services? And that's the crucial part. And I know it is painful for people to think about post-attack scenarios, because again, nobody wants to think about bad things happening to them, because we as human beings, we have evolved to be only remember good news and think about better scenarios, not think about worse scenarios. But human mind has this state of will and and intellect. And intellect is pessimistic. That's when you plan. So you have to go into a state of intellect to really plan post attack. And that's the discussion we got to have. That's not enough discussion is happening there, because risk is not about risk avoidance. Risk is about risk resilience. That's the most critical aspect of risk mitigation.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction. In this conversation we're having about the right conversations, I'd love to ask you about another element of this is, we're about 45 days in this report going public and lots of engagement discussing this. And fortuitously or unfortuitously, depending on how you want to view it, we're having to see a lot of healthcare ransomware in the news, which is what we focused on. We looked at risk, healthcare, and ransomware. And the question I've had to answer a bunch is what makes healthcare so different? And I always kind of give the patented Steve Stone 3-part answer. It's healthcare's not being targeted uniquely, so it's not that. Healthcare architecture is not inherently unique. It has nuance, but so does finance, so does ICS. Everything has nuance. The third thing is what's the difference? It's data. It's these massive piles of data, particularly sensitive data, how fast they're growing, how disparate they are across an organization. And it's really obvious in the research. The challenge we've had, and the conversation I would love to get some guidance from you on here is when we talk about data realities with organizations, we often find organizations aren't really ready for that conversation. There aren't strong baselines about data, and especially how it converts to business. What are the right ways to do that with C-suites, with you and your peers? How do we communicate effectively around data realities and what that means?
If you look at the healthcare industry, that industry has a lot of regulations. And because of the regulations, the digital transformation has been slower in the healthcare industry. But when the digital transformation is now happening at full swing, a lot of personal professional information is out there across healthcare systems. And this is a very data-rich environment, and which attracts a lot of attention from bad actors. So that's why we see healthcare being targeted more. And also some of the technology, particularly cyber technology or cyber best practices, are still early in the healthcare industry. And so you have this combination of a data-rich, target-rich environment, fast digitization, combined with not yet mature systems and processes around cyber. Banks and financial services have done this for a very long time, but healthcare is still new to this process. And the combination of which is really driving the attacks and all the news that you hear about around healthcare. So the primary thing about healthcare is how do they ensure that healthcare provider, specifically to hospitals and clinics, are open. They are able to admit patients, because it can have a fatal consequence if their systems and processes are down, if the services are down. So how do they create cyber resilience strategy, risk mitigation strategy? How do they ensure that the minimal viable hospitals are operational all the time, irrespective of whatever happens? So they need to think about their business completely differently. They need to think about how do they ensure that their core services are always up and running, patient care always up and running, making sure all medical devices attached to the patients always up and running. They are able to have ER always operational. So really understanding what are the minimum set of services that needs to be up and running all the time. How do we ensure that these services have the right resiliency infrastructure around it? And then at the same time, ensure that all the important health records are safe and secure, because they are a very target-rich environment. And that requires a lot of planning, a lot of preparations. It requires talent, team, best practices, and technology. And this is why Rubrik is partnering heavily with healthcare organizations around the world to ensure that they are cyber resilient, to ensure that they are continuing operation irrespective of whatever happens.
Yeah, you made a comment there about the technological maturity. And I think that was, without a doubt, my favorite part of this particular research project. These are hard, profound, important problems. And it's starting to seem like the technology is catching up. These legacy concepts of DLP and disaster recovery, I could go down the whole list. It feels like the technology is finally able to deliver on our plans and our process, and we can really be impactful there. So without a doubt, that was my favorite part of this. What I'll say is, I know I promised no tough questions, but I've got just enough time for one more for you. I'll put you on the spot a little bit. What was your favorite part of this study? What had really resonated with you?
My favorite part of this study is really kind of when you look at the healthcare data and understand the depth of density of sensitive records, and then understanding how much of these records are getting manipulated, and then on top of it, like hospitals and healthcare systems operate, and then combine that with the digital intensity that is required given the cost of healthcare, and digital intensity means more digitization. So this is like extremely interesting space where more digitization is needed to reduce cost, and more digitization is leading to higher cyber attack. So we are in
Absolutely.
kind of like a very interesting time and place. And again, the healthcare brings the data security into the focus, because infrastructure doesn't matter. You can rent it from the cloud or you can own it in your data center. But data, which is the most critical asset of every healthcare organization, how important it is to secure and what are the risks they face, this report like really brought to the fore, and that was extremely exciting.
Well, we really appreciate your time here today. I can think of no better way to kick off a session around risk and resiliency than talking about risk and resiliency with a CEO. So, Bipul, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve. It was fun.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Data Security Decoded. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you're notified about new episodes. Leave us a review or a comment to let us know what you enjoyed most about this episode. For more information about measuring your data's risk, check out the resources from Rubrik Zero Labs in the show notes. See you next time.